Hi, David. Thank you for coming on Redesigning Life. For those of you tuning in, David Kessler is a expert in grief and loss, and you are coming onto the podcast for me at such a personal time because I'm dealing with grief myself. So I want to discuss with you all of the different nuances of grief. And I know that maybe pet grief is not necessarily your expertise, but it is something that for me personally is so different that I want to talk to you about that. So the biggest introduction I've ever done in my life. Hello and welcome.
Thank you. I'm grateful to be here. And I'd like to just sort of share a little bit about me for folks that may
Please.
not know me. So, first of all, I feel like in many ways destined for this because I was a buffet of losses in my childhood. I grew up and I hold my parents with love today, but I grew up with a father who was an addict, anger issues would beat me. I had a mother who today would probably be diagnosed as bipolar and maybe narcissistic, and a lot of neglect and sexual abuse, just, a horrible childhood. And on top of it all, we lost our home in a hurricane, which, like, I get what's going on in the world. So then, after all that, my mother died when I was 13. And while she was dying in the hospital, the hotel we were at, there was one of the first mass shootings in the US. So I understand loss on so many levels. And I've also had losses in addition to that since then. But I say all those things just to illustrate. And by the way, I had a sweet, sweet dog in my childhood poisoned. Now, let me just, to say all of that, I want you to know, like, all those things are losses. In a relationship with a narcissistic person is the death of yourself. Your
Yes.
home being destroyed is the death of your home. And I got to
Yes.
tell you, I so appreciate who you are and what you do, because I will tell you, it took me years to attach to a home because I was
Mm-hmm.
willing to care about my house.
Right.
So loss comes up in so many different ways in our world. I got to tell you, I'm one of those people that sometimes people are chatting and I'm like, well, that's loss, that's loss, that's loss. And they're like, you see everything as grief. And I'm like, kind of is in a
As
lot.
it is.
Kind of
Yes.
is. Those are all, I say a breakup is the death of a relationship. A
Yes.
divorce is the death of a marriage. So this is life, and you help people in specific ways, but you also help people in life. And that's kind of how I do too.
Yes. Yeah. I had a very turbulent childhood myself. And for me, my safe haven was my room and my home. And as long as I had a safe place to retreat to, I felt a foundation there. And that's what sort of has pushed me in my career. And I know that the loss of your mother and then also of your son has even put you into a deeper level of meaning of understanding what really grief looks like.
Yeah, my younger son died 8 years ago. And I'll tell you, just talking to what you're dealing with now with the death of your sweet pet, Harper, correct?
Yes.
You know, I had my son die, David. I had a sweet, sweet dog of ours, Angel, die 9 months after. And the question I always got is, well, which was the worst? Or the pet loss wasn't bad because you had a son and all that. And people always want to know either which loss was the worst. And if we're talking about other people, I always go, the worst loss is always yours.
Yeah.
I even remember with my own son and my sweet pet going, why are you asking me to choose? There are
Yeah.
two horrible events in my life. I don't have the bandwidth for just one. I have the bandwidth for any animal or person that I love. When people say, what do you think about pet loss? I always say, if the love is real, the grief is real.
Hmm.
Grief is about
No
love.
matter who it is, no matter what it is.
Oh, right, right. And the thing is, we can never know each other's grief. I will never know what it's like to have to say goodbye to sweet Harper. You will never know what it was like to say goodbye to my son. We can't know each other's pain, but we can
Did,
sit with each other and love each other through it.
but is it normal? I remember, so my best friend I grew up with since I was 10 years old, she lost her husband 5 years ago. And when I was going through this pain with Harper, I felt foolish even discussing it with her because who am I to talk to her about grief when I lost a pet and she lost her husband? Is it normal to feel guilt or compare yourself to people who've lost their son? Like, I can't even imagine losing my daughter. So, is it normal during the grieving process to sort of compare yourself and to try to dumb yourself down for lack of a better word, in order to cope with it?
Yes, it is normal to do that. And we're also afraid of it getting minimized. And I think everyone feels that. Look, when I'm with someone who had a murder right in front of them, I'm like, well, I didn't have a murder. I mean, that sounds. So, I mean, I think we all, just because we're humans, we compare our losses. But I have a belief that, like, and I'm saying this to you as a bereaved parent, and this is the part that I think people don't get. I'm a bereaved parent, and you have had the horrible loss of your sweet one. All tears count.
Yeah.
Your tears count.
I know that you have a list of do's and don'ts when people lose someone, and it's the what not to say. And I read the list, and I also saw you discussing it, and people were shocked that some people do say, "Oh, well, they brought it upon themselves," or enough already. I would think, listening to that, there's no way anybody would say that to your face. But strangely enough, the 2 days after Harper died, I was crying, and someone who I love very much said that to me, like, enough already. It's been 2 days. It's like, what? And what I realized in that moment is that everyone deals with grief differently, and some people can't, and it's too much to bear to watch somebody else going through that. Do you notice that in the years that you've been doing this?
Absolutely. Here's the thing, our grief makes people uncomfortable
Why is that?
because people feel like it might be contagious, and
Mm.
people also don't like other people's pain. Look, I'm a fixer. If you came to me with any problem, I can give you three solutions right now, unless it's grief. And then
But you're a grief expert.
but I can't fix you because you're not broken.
Okay.
And I think when people run into people that they can't, they just, one of the things I've heard over the years from so many people, and you might hear it someday too, is we just want the old you back. And it's like, well, can you bring Harper back, David back, all the people we love? I mean, if you can't, we're going to evolve and we're going to change.
Yes.
So we have to accept our losses, and our friends have to accept the changes in us. And it's challenging for a grief illiterate world. You
It's
know,
true.
one of the things, and I didn't know if you were going to say this, but I'll tell you, now that you're in grief, everyone's going to come out of the woodwork and talk to you because they suddenly know you speak their language.
Yes. Yes. I was at the doctor's office, and another girl in the office had lost her dog, and this woman I don't even know was like hugging me and crying on my shoulder. And it's funny because when I was really in the depth of it, like really deep, that I could not eat. I was a shell of myself. All I wanted to do, and I know this sounds crazy, but I looked up pet cemeteries because I thought, well, I'll go sit. This sounds so nuts. But I wanted to go sit with other people who were grieving their pets so that I felt like I wasn't alone, because I felt so alone in the moment. But what did help me is reading about sort of or the afterlife of pets. And I don't know, what is your stance on afterlife? Like, do you believe in it? In all of the time, all of the years that you've been doing this, what is your belief system around that?
I do. I do. I wrote a book years ago about deathbed visions and how when we're dying, our loved ones come to greet us. Like people who are dying will see their grandmother, their mother, and people also would see their pets greeting them. I find the idea that we all might be reunited. Look, I don't pretend to know anything about what the afterlife is like, but oh my gosh, I hope to see everyone I've loved and cared for again.
Yeah, that gave me hope, because not just that I will be reunited with her, but mostly just knowing that her soulmate, or her physical body isn't here, but her soul is still around me. And that it did give me some sort of, like, it let me breathe again, that although her physical body isn't here, she still is here. So I know if you lose somebody close to you, I do not know what it's like, and I feel such pain for you losing David, your son. But there, when somebody is going through that depth, like, of the grief that is so horrifying and so painful that they can't see out of it, what do you tell a client? What do you tell someone?
Well, a big thing is to understand the pain we feel in the moment. We think our mind would be so kind to us and tell us, I'm here for you, I love you, I'm with you. Our mind says, by the way, this pain you're feeling, this loneliness, this devastation, maybe forever.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's like, really? Really? Like, I mean, imagine that. Imagine you're sitting at a restaurant and you overhear someone talking about they've had a loss and they're in horrible pain. And you're like, you're going to be in it for, I mean, you would never say that. And yet our mind says it. So I often tell people our feelings change. No feeling is final. No feeling is forever. And here's the thing. We need our grief witnessed.
Yeah.
We need our grief witnessed by other people. Now, the weird thing about our world, and I teach what I call security in grief. Like, I have security in my grief. Harper dying doesn't take away from my grief. It's another horrible grief in the world. Someone else's spouse, someone's grandmother. It doesn't, I'm secure in my grief. No other griefs change me or lessen mine or insult mine or anything like that. And when we think about these feelings are final, it so scares us. And what happens is we often have our best friend, our spouse, our loved one, and they get everything about us. And then we go into grief and they don't get it.
Yeah.
And it's like, wait, you're my person. How
Right.
do you not get this?
Right. It's funny you said that you think that your mind plays games on with you, and I want to discuss that. But one thing that was scaring me a lot is on social media, everybody was saying, "Oh, I lost my dog 12 years ago, and I'm still can't sometimes get out of bed." And so when I'm in the grief, I'm going, "What? Like, I'm gonna feel like this forever." But my best friend who lost her husband said to me during this time, she goes, "You know, after my husband died, you said something to me." Um, Soon after that, I wanted to punch you in the face. She said this, but she goes, now I know it's true. And I was crying. And I said, what did I say? She goes, you said you're not always going to feel like this. And I'm just now telling you, you're not always going to feel this much grief. And she was right, because at that moment I thought, this is how I'm always going to feel. And your mind plays tricks on you there, but it also plays tricks on you about regrets. You would think when somebody passes or a pet passes that you just are in grief that they're no longer there, but your mind, it's like a mind F where it's going, you should have done this. You didn't do this. You forgot to say this. You forgot to tell them that. You should have taken them to the carnival. All of these should have, that you're already feeling horrible and it just piles on. Why does your mind do that?
Because your mind wants to find control. Your mind wants to distract you and go, oh, if only you would have done this, they might have not died. If only you wouldn't have done that, or maybe it was too soon, or maybe you didn't do it right, or here's a regret. Because your mind wants to focus on something outside you. Your mind doesn't want to live in a world where we're helpless and people we love and pets we love die. It doesn't want that. And
Right.
so it gives us these false things. It also sometimes is a distraction from the pain because it's just too hard to sit in the pain. And grief is a strange time where people who get everything and love us and know us feel like strangers, and strangers can feel like family and friends.
That is so true, David.
They understand it. They understand it.
When you lost David, your son, how was that different? I mean, obviously it was very different. You were in a different part of your life. You're a parent as opposed to losing your mother. But what did you think helped you sort of navigate that time?
It's a great question. I think I've been training therapists for decades, and a lot of therapists go into this field because of tragedies they had. And I knew, wow, if they can get through those tragedies, they're evidence that survival and life after loss. We always talk about life after death for our loved ones. I feel like I talk about life after death for us.
Yes.
How do we find that again? And I knew the only way out of the pain was through the pain. And I got to
So
tell
what
you,
did that look like to you?
I went to a grief counselor. I went to a grief group. It took me 3 times to get to a group. So you need to surround yourself, or at least have your grief discussions with people who get it. Now, one of the things we go really wrong with is that one person who doesn't get it. And I understand the one person who doesn't get it could be our spouse, our boyfriend, our best friend. It might be them. Is we have to stop going to that well for grief support.
Right.
I always say no matter how many times you walk up and down an aisle of a hardware store, you'll never find milk. It's this thing about if you don't get your grief support from them, don't write them off, don't divorce them, they don't get grief. And there's some people in this world, I call them practical grievers. Something bad happens, they just move on.
Yes.
That's how they're wired. People want to know, well, which is the right way? There's no right way. They're just wired differently than us.
Yes.
And
I always say you can't, it's like expecting a cat to bark.
Exactly. It's so true.
I've wasted a lot of time waiting for those cats to bark.
Absolutely. And
But it's
when
true.
you realize that, it's freeing.
Yes, it is. It's funny you say don't write them off because during that time I saw a different side of a lot of people in my life. And there was anger that almost came up in me because I wasn't supported in the way that I wanted to be with certain people. And I did feel like, God, I'm going to write them off. But now once, you get out of that cycle, you realize, you see a little bit clearer. And you're right. There are just some people who cannot handle it.
Let me tell you, recently, I went to dinner with a friend, and I was just having a horrible day around my son. It just, for whatever reason, it got me. It still gets you from time to time. And I went to dinner and he said, "How are you?" And I told him how I was, and I said all this and what I was going through. And he paused and looked at me and said, "Any interesting upcoming travel?" And I was like, "Did you not?" I thought, "Did you not hear of it?" But then I went, "Oh, remember who he is.
Yeah.
He's not my grief person. It's okay." I started discussing grief with a travel buddy,
Right.
wrong person. Just,
Right.
you know, it's not everyone traffics in feelings.
That's right. That's right. So during the grief process, you were saying, like you're at dinner with a friend and you started feeling grief for David. Why is it that grief isn't linear and it does come in waves? And out of nowhere, a lot of people say like the wave, it comes, it goes. And there are times during the day that out of nowhere, I'll think of Harper and a tear. I mean, I'm sitting here now and I have her fur in a little vial here and her little booty. And, there are times that I'm not even here. And I just feel this pang of pain. Why does grief work like that?
A couple of things. First of all, I helped Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who's, one of the huge names in grief and loss, who wrote the stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. And she was the first to tell you they're not linear. There's no 5 easy steps for grief. There's no one way. Grief is messy. Grief is messy. And it's one of the things that happens is we have what I call grief bursts. You're fine, you're holding it together, and then all of a sudden it just hits you. That's a grief burst. I remember there's lots of times I will be in some situation, whether it's work or something social, and I, for whatever reason, am getting grief bursts, and I'm like, "Excuse me, got to go to the restroom." And I go have a big cry, and it's like, and I come out and people are like, "You okay?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, I don't know why I'm drinking so much caffeine these days." And I just, I'm like, I'm not even going to explain anything to them. But the
Right.
other thing is, and it's really a subtler thing you're going to feel, when we think about our love, like my love for my son David wasn't like, "I love you." Like my love was like, "Oh my God, oh, I love you so much. I love you. Oh, I love you." And it's sort of up and down and, "Oh, you're driving me crazy today." And here's the thing, after they die, that love continues. So sometimes we don't just have a grief burst, we also have a love burst, where
Yeah.
you will just get filled with love for Harper. And the thing is, you knew how to love Harper in Harper's presence. You have to learn to love Harper in their absence.
Yes. Agreed.
And
It's just
the only
wild though how different it is than a person because I lost many people that were close to me, including many family members, and it's just different. And I can't put my finger on it. It's just different, and it feels like you were just saying. There are times that I have to kind of close myself off and not tell anyone that I'm feeling it. I just say I'm okay. But isn't that a shame that we feel that we have to hide our sorrow because it's been so long? And it's funny that you say that Elizabeth had coined all those stages, but I think a lot of people are under the impression that it is linear. And people have said that to me, "Oh, you're in number 5, so you're almost done." But then we need to make that
and
very clear in this podcast. It
right.
is those stages of grief are not linear. You don't get to one and then the rest are gone.
And you know this from your world. The media always wants 5 easy steps. Can you give us 3? And I mean, that's what they want. That's what they did with her. And grief isn't like that.
It isn't.
There's not, and we talked about, and acceptance isn't the end. I mean, I've talked about meaning now, and I love that her family enabled me to add a 6th stage, which is meaning. but it's still it goes on and revolves around us. You know,
Can you
we're
talk about your
human.
book, Finding
Yeah.
Meaning?
So, and I would love to come back and talk about shame because I love that you broke that up. I brought
We
that
need to
up.
talk about shame.
So the thing is, after David died, I wrestled with all these. I'm like, yep, you're in denial. You can't believe it. Yep, you're angry. Yep, you're bargaining. The bargaining's the what ifs, the if onlys. When I started thinking I'm going to have to deal with acceptance someday, I'm like, and then what? That's it? I just accept it? And it wasn't enough. I wanted to find meaning. And meaning doesn't take away the pain, but it cushions it. And so when we talk about meaning, people often hear meaning. There's no meaning in a child's death, a spouse after 50 years, a murder, COVID, a pet loss. There's no meaning. And I'll go, correct. Meaning is not in the horrible event. Meaning is in us. It's what we do after.
Ah, yes.
And people make the mistake of thinking, all right, what? I got to go start a charity? No, it doesn't have to be a huge, gigantic thing. Meaning is often in the moments. Like right now, someone is probably alone, isolated, and in a lot of pain, and they're going to hear this. And that makes this a meaningful moment for me. And one of the other things I talk about with meaning is, we often feel when a loved one dies, a part of us died with them, but a part of them lives on in us.
Yes.
And how do we nurture that part that lives on?
Yes.
To not just go through this, but eventually to grow through it. Meaning, we often talk about the post-traumatic stress of everything these days. Meaning is the post-traumatic growth.
I
And how
love
can
that.
we grow? And not just, I had to decide after my son died, is his death going to make me smaller or bigger? And
Yeah.
I wanted to make me bigger in his honor.
Can you share with me how you did that?
I think one of the ways is my son, he died at 21, but when he was in kindergarten, he was voted most likely to be a helper. And he was trying to, in his life, figure out, did he want to go to medical school? Did he want to be a paramedic? He was trying to figure out his role as helper. And he didn't get to do that in life. And I hope somehow with my work and talking about meaning and sharing that in death, he gets to help people that he didn't get to help in life.
Yeah. I love
And I'll
that.
tell you, my son loved our dogs, loved our pets, and the thing is, like right now, I have just such a sweet chocolate lab, Lucy. And I'll tell you, sometimes I look at her and go, her personality is so unique in all the world. And I think that's what's important about understanding the grief is that whether it's your spouse or your child, they were so unique in all the world. And that's what we miss so much. And I think what's confusing about pet loss is, when we talk about how we see grief, part of it is measured by frequency, intensity, things like that. Like you might have a brother who lives across the country you see once a year. I promise you, your pet, hours a day, every single day, no matter what, by your side, in your pet, in your bed, at your feet, every
Yes.
day.
Every day for 15 years.
That's a lot of intensity and frequency.
Yeah. Yes, you're right. I never thought about it that way. I never thought about it that way. I actually thought it's just because pets aren't jerks and sometimes people are, but you're right. It's just the frequency that I'm missing a lot. And that's why it's so hard.
Pets aren't jerks. I will give that to you also.
They are not. You were talking about shame, and it's funny because I was
Unconditional love.
telling you. So the shame comes up of the, I should have done it. Like, I'll give you one example. After Harper passed, I had her euthanized here at the house, and it, she was, she took her last breath in my living room. And I forgot that I had a ring camera that can capture that area of my house. And I made the mistake of watching the video after she passed and after she took her last breath. The sound that came out of my body didn't even sound human. It was this like roar coming from my stomach of a scream. And I had sadness and shame for doing that because here she probably is taking her last breath, ascending into the next dimension. And I'm screaming like a crazy person. And I felt sad. I felt I should have kept it together a little bit longer until her body left. It was like your mind makes up all of these. You should have, you were not good enough. You're a piece of poop or whatever. It's like, why? Why does shame just rear its ugly head when you're already feeling low?
So we live in a world that sometimes I think we project spiritual things that get in the way of our feelings. I wouldn't write your story that way. Let me tell you, sometimes, and this is like the teachings we all hear, I don't happen to believe entities when they die are just that fragile and that weak. And we live in a world that says, oh, you ruined her ascension. Oh my gosh, if you're going to grieve, you're going to break the connection. You can't have those feelings. And here's the thing. They're in the spiritual realm. We're in the human realm. And we have to have human emotions. And this is something I tell myself all the time. I can't be any more enlightened than I am in any given moment. And you know, if I was writing your story, I would say that scream was a scream of love, of heartbreak. I don't think Harper was in any realm that you were interrupting anything or you should have held it together. I understand that's a story. I don't happen to buy into that story. I think
But
that if
the
Harper
people,
had looked down at you and could have seen you in that moment, Harper would have been like, look at her love for me.
I
Look at
hope
her
so.
scream for me. I mean, to me, sometimes people tell me, I pounded the bed, I yelled, I screamed. I'm like, oh my gosh, I would love that when I die. I would love to see the people around me loving me that much. Like, you don't pound the bed of anyone you don't care about. You
No,
don't
that's
scream
true.
if you don't care about them. Those
Thank
are
you,
acts,
David.
those are acts of love.
So thank you. That made me feel a lot better. But what if somebody has lost their husband or child and they're going through the shame? Let's say they lost their child and they think about that time that they never took them to Disneyland, or they just wanted to go to the park that day and I never took them, and why did I put work before them, and why didn't I spend more time playing on the floor with them? And it's the why, the why, the why, and it's this constant loop. What do you tell a client who's in that shame loop?
Well, first of all, I think about, we all want more. We all did this imperfectly. We all wish we could have done it differently. Our work is for our mind not to revolve but evolve. So it is to get out of that loop. One of the things as we were talking about, people say now you got to do your grief work. Okay, what's my grief work? And that's one of the reasons I wanted to do a workbook. Like, as if we're sitting at your kitchen table together. And shame can be insidious. Can I just share a couple of things so you can hear these? And
Please.
okay, and I have these. People can take a look at them to think about this. On one hand over here, to gauge where your shame is, I'm private with my grief, or I'm completely open with my grief. Okay?
Okay.
If you're private with your grief, you might have some shame. When meeting strangers, open or private?
I'm definitely open.
Okay. At work,
Somewhere in between.
with your partner,
Open for the most part.
with your closest friends,
Open for the
with
most part.
friends you haven't seen in a while.
Somewhere in between.
And it goes on asking those because we don't realize how, and you and I are lucky, we live in a world where we kind of determine our work. I
Right.
mean, if we worked in the post office, you and I next to each other, we couldn't be as open.
Right.
Or if we were someone's waiter or waitress.
Yes.
So a lot of that feeds the isolation, the aloneness we feel. And to think about, even you and I, as much as we can do what we sort of want, we still have a little shame around it.
Yes, I don't think anyone in walking on this earth is open 100%. That's just it's impossible to be because we are allowed to have our own thoughts. I mean, sometimes I'm doing my friends and my partner a service by not being so open because I have crazy thoughts in my head sometimes. So, I think that the more open we can be, you're right, there's less shame there. I can completely see a correlation between the two.
And I also know for me, when I've been in pain, I had more than I could give to any one person. I so needed to spread it around.
Yes.
You know, like
Yes.
like you said, I can't let you see everything that's going on. So I'm going to give a little bit to everyone, and that's okay.
Yes.
That's okay to do.
Yes. It was during that Harper passed on a Friday. That whole weekend was a complete blur to me. It was almost like I was blackout drunk because I was having conversations with people, but I was forgetting. Did I already tell you this? Did I already tell you that? And it is this like cyclone you're sort of in the beginning stages. And I think that if anyone's listening to this that's going through that, to give yourself some grace and allow the time to pass. And what Dave and I just said, like, you're not going to feel like this forever. Not to say you won't have the moments, but that depth of grief does get a lot easier. And I think you had said it on another podcast. It's not about getting over it, but it's about moving forward.
Right? Moving forward, and to know it doesn't mean we ever forget.
Right.
It doesn't mean we ever forget. And the outside world, one of the things that happens is so many people say to me, like, my friend had this loss, I know it's going to be a year coming up, or it's going to be this, or it's going to be that. Should I mention it? And I always go, yes, mention it. Yes. Say their loved one's name. Yes, mention it. And then they'll come back and they'll go, David, I took your advice, and you know what? I mentioned it, that it's going to be a year since her mom died, and she started crying. I made her cry. Thanks a lot, David. And I'll go, you didn't make her cry.
No, yeah.
She was already crying. You became safe for her to suddenly cry with.
Yes. Yes. That is so true. It's not like she forgot. It was a year ago. She remembered. She was just hoping somebody else would too. And you saying that probably made her feel safe. Yes. I love
Absolutely.
that. Can you show the book? And so anybody listening, I will have in the show notes David's book, all of his books. He's written 6, his Instagram, but also the workbook. But there is a count. It's such a good workbook that
I
there's a
know.
counterfeit out there. So how does somebody tell which one is yours?
So mine is the one that's completely teal. It is Finding Meaning, the workbook, and it's the only one by me, David Kessler, They know they got the right one because they go to grief.com, and then they can go to an Amazon link, a Barnes and Noble, and Indie Books. Or just make sure if you go to your independent bookstore, which I love, just ask them to get the one by me, because there is. It's a shocking thing, as we said, but like how weird that success means people are going to use AI to copy your work.
It's crazy, but you know what? I would take it as a compliment that people are
I'm
copying your
trying.
work.
I'm trying.
Just wait until somebody comes out as David Kessler with with your picture on Instagram.
Oh, I live with that, and I'm sure you do. You know,
It's
it's
wild.
crazy. It's crazy.
Thank you so much, David, for your time. Again, if anyone's listening in their car, I will have all of David's contact information in the show notes. Thank you so much for being on Redesigning Life. It was so timely that you came on.
Oh, and you know, thank you for your work. I'll tell you, it's interesting. Like I mentioned, just about not attaching to my world and finding a safe place that, like, you know, I've called on so many people like you to help me feel safe in sort of connecting again to my surroundings. And, you know, I think you're doing healing work.
Thank you.
You know,
Thank
I
you
hope you
so
know
much for
that.
saying that. Thank
Yeah,
you. I
it's
appreciate
true.
that.
Healing comes in many, many forms. So thank you. I love your work and I love all that you do. So thank you.
Thank you, David.